Hi everybody, this is Adam with Transparency Pro the Game Machine, bringing you a new video. There's been a lot of talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake. For those of you who've never used the internet in a while, Final Fantasy VII, one of the greatest games of all time, my personal favorite, it's getting a remake. And it's been pretty positive. Then they announced that they were cutting it up into episodes. Wait, no, actually, they never said the word episodes. What's funny about this is, in the interviews that they did with Katase and Nomura, who are in charge of the project, the word episode was never used. In fact, the only thing that was used was multi-part. Multi-part. Is that really the same thing? I'm actually questioning that ideology of it, because when we think of episodic games, I think most people think of stuff like the Telltale games, where they're very episodic adventures, where it's like a 2-3 hour experience maybe, and then you have to wait and then play, which I think that's totally not what's going on here, and this interview proves it. So I'm going to go ahead and read this off to you, because I feel there's some people that don't really understand the full facts. And I've seen many videos and read a lot of stuff, and I feel like not everybody's really got the full story. So I'm going to go ahead and deliver what I think and give you some information from this interview. I'll even have a link below to the interview if you want to read it. This is from, well, they have it right now. This is originally made in Famitsu, but this was on Geek Snack. Never heard of them. Sounds tasty, I guess. Anyway, so they were asked about the game being in multiple parts. Basically, when you look into it, they really mentioned here in the interview that they really cared about, they wanted to keep the density of the game. They want to have a lot of stuff in the game. They didn't want to just make a kind of a, half-assed, let's slap it out the door, yeah, let's cut this part out, let's get this part out. They really want to do a lot more with it. And they do mention that with current technology, it's a little bit harder to pull off a game of Final Fantasy VII scope. And I have heard the complaints. I have heard, but Skyrim's so big. Or, oh, Grand Theft Auto's so big. Or, your penis, he's so big. Now, look, Final Fantasy VII was one of the biggest games of its time. Sure, nowadays you could slap that thing on a DVD. Hey, you can put it all on one DVD and get that to work. You can download it digitally right now. So, one thing. Don't have to swap out disc. So then the question is, why? It should be so easy to just put on a Blu-ray or DVD. But really, I don't think it's that way it is. When you go back and look at the scope of Final Fantasy VII compared to something like Skyrim, Skyrim is an open world game. It was designed in and out to be this giant, massive world, where Final Fantasy VII is more of a linear experience. But yet, a linear experience with a lot of locations and locales to go to. Various enemy types. I would say it has a bigger variety of enemy types than most normal open world RPGs today. You have usually the same enemies, or some of the same enemies reskinned. Now, sure, Final Fantasy VII did have some of that, but I would be willing to bet that Skyrim probably doesn't have as much enemy diversity as Final Fantasy VII does. And that was a game in 1997. On top of that, too, the city of Midgar itself is huge. That thing could be its own open world. Sure, it would be very bland, but I mean, you would have the upper plate, the lower plates, you have the different sectors you could go through by train, you can go through sewers, like, there's a variety. There's, some different locales, but still, it's not a very pretty place to explore, but you could technically make that its own open world. It's so huge. Even in the game, they did represent it in a tiny little thing, but when you play that game, that was where you first spent a good few hours of that game is in Midgar. There was a lot there. And so, you take that and you compare it to the open world, all the different caves and dungeons. In fact, there was a lot of interactivity. If you look at the trailer, it wasn't just Cloud jumping off the train, Barrett saying some text on the screen, and then them just running off. These were like fully, going rendered scenes. I would assume they're pre-rendered, but they could be real time. I don't know. But, to me, I don't think it's going to be as simple as that. And they actually mentioned that they are going to make them into full-fledged games. Each part is a full-fledged game. So, parts that are full-fledged games. Can we think of something like that? Oh, let's see. I may have something on the shelf that's Final Fantasy related. That actually could fit that bill. Oh. What's this game? Final Fantasy XIII. Okay, not everybody's favorite. Alright, I get that. But this was split up into parts. Each part was a full story. And they all tied together. Kinda sounds like to me what they're really wanting to do with this. Doesn't sound like they just want to make a few, 10, 12-hour episodes here and there and just then they're like, oh, let's buy some materia for like $5.99 each. Maybe they would do that. But I think as far as the overall game, I think they're aiming more for this. And also what they did with Final Fantasy X and X-2. Whether or not you think those are great stories, X-2 or 13 and 13-2 and 13-3, you gotta understand, these are bigger stories. But Final Fantasy VII itself has so much going on. The enemies, they've had enemies that are huge. Huge variety of those. Not just a handful like God of War or anything else. But back then they scaled everything down. So, the enemies didn't look as big as they were supposed to. Like, you look at the cutscenes, Ultimate Weapon could squash all the characters very easily. I mean, they would be like this compared to him, but, in the game, the scale wasn't that big. So, and you looked at the weapon from the first boss fight in the game, and he wasn't as tall. I mean, he's definitely big, but then you look at him in this cutscene, he looks a lot bigger, a lot more menacing. So, I think that there's also skill to what this comes with as well. Also, they talked about changing it into more action-based gameplay, which is fine and all. Oh yeah, and also the cross-dressing scene everybody wants, they're going to keep that in. So, yay. But basically, what they want to create is a game in a couple different parts, maybe 2 to 3. It's not going to be anything like, oh, here's a 12-part episode that you can get. You can buy the whole season of Final Fantasy VII for $49.95. Nothing like that. But what they were trying to do, they're actually trying to make these into full-fledged things. And if the first part of this game turns out to be a huge, massive game, maybe 20, 30, 40 hours, and then the next parts are just as long or longer, and they're full-fledged experiences that can stand on their own, then sign me up. We can dwell and hate on everything, especially, right now. And sure, they could botch this up. They could botch this to hell and back. But you know what? Let's at least give them a chance. Let's not just have our jump to conclusions, Matt, and just start jumping to the conclusion that they're all going to charge us $5.99 just to keep Aerith's hair. Aerith. Sorry, fanboys. But, let's just try to be calm and rational about it. I know I'm asking a lot of the internet people, but let's give it a chance. Let's see what they can do before we get our pitchforks. If the first episode sucks, then let them have it. But, till then, let's just try to be a little bit optimistic and see what the future holds. Sure, it's okay to be a little skeptical, but doesn't necessarily mean everybody's out to suck you dry. I mean, not everybody's EA. Anyways, guys, till next time, game on, and try to stay salty free, folks. Sodium in your diet is bad.